You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games, where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss how hot was Horblight Keep. Well, hello there, sages and adventurers. My name's Jody, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Matt.
I see what you're trying to do here, and okay.
Kind of worked.
Yeah, sure.
How are you?
Oh, you did ask me a question. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, take us to the table and explain what the heck this episode's about.
Oh my gosh. All right. So on a previous episode, I actually just realized this as we were starting. I had opened up my binder to the page in which I was going to introduce Horblight Keep, but then I realized I already read this on a previous episode, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to reference that previous episode, which I don't know what episode number or what it was called. I think maybe it was called Designing Dungeons. I don't remember. It was a fun one, though. It was good, and this is the follow-up to that episode. So I ran through a fairly sizable, I would say about 90% of the content that I had prepared when I built Horblight Keep, which was about a 40-room dungeon, as in kind of an end-game dungeon, high-level dungeon for our long-running Dolmenwood campaign, which has concluded. I designed it, and we ran through it, and I wanted to talk today about how hot the dungeon was. And this is something that was coined on the Discord by the Encyclopedia, and then based on some stuff that Gels was talking about. So this is HOTT stands for Hazards, Obstacles, Tricks, and Traps, which are sort of four crucial components of a dungeon. What those things mean to each and every person designing a dungeon or reviewing a dungeon, or, you know, like us, analyzing a dungeon, they're going to kind of, you know, be a little bit fungible. But I think you could do a lot worse than using those four things as kind of a shorthand. Tricks is kind of the one that stands out to me as something I want to talk to you about, because tricks, I think, could mean something, a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But the rest of them, hazards, obstacles, and traps, I think are all important to have in our Shadowdark dungeons. So for those of you who maybe didn't listen to the last episode, let me give you a rundown of what this is. This dungeon is a large keep that is specifically imbued with fairy magic. It is meant to be very cold, hence the Horblight of Hoarfrost that has kind of kept this stranglehold on this dungeon through the Cold Prince, who is a fairy lord who has been banished from the realm of Dolmenwood, and this is kind of his last and really only foothold in Dolmenwood. At least we think so. And that's the setup. I think it took like 5 or 6 sessions to really kind of chew our way through it. We'll definitely talk about the experience, but the dungeon itself, I think overall, was a success.
Alrighty then, let us gather around the fire that is desperately needed here with the hoarfrost crackling down the walls, and chit-chat about this dungeon that my friend Matt designed from soup to nuts, top to bottom.
Oh, yeah.
Stone to pinnacle, whatever it may be. And my role in this, for those who don't know, was I was a player. I got to run a couple different characters through it, which was a real treat. And yeah, you said as we wrapped up that you felt like overall dungeon was a success, felt good. Is there something in particular that you were looking for to go, that was the mark of success? Like, where would you start with, like, here's the thing I think went best?
Yeah, so the dungeon itself was sort of compartmentalized into broadly speaking, three sections. So there was the ground floor and the kind of general kind of area around the dungeon, which included some gardens, which we can talk about for sure. And then there was the upper floors and then the dungeon. So those are kind of like the three major locations. And what I thought when I set out to design the dungeon, I didn't really realize this, but I ended up creating a situation where they were all interconnected insofar as there were factions that were present on all 3 floors, or all 3 areas, I should say. There were more than 3 floors. But the thing that I thought was a success was that depending on where you were in the dungeon, there was a different flavor of kind of fairy weirdness. The higher you went up, the kind of more, I would say, whimsical or weird or somehow otherworldly things got. And then the further you went down, the more kind of like the fairy horror was supposed to kind of set in. And so I kind of put that on an axis. And then the ground level was really meant to be just kind of your standard issue fairy weirdness, broadly speaking. Now, I don't know if that felt like that as a player, but when I was running it, it was easy for me to parse how to embellish or how to rule things or how to kind of interpret random encounters, for instance, by where you were in the dungeon would kind of slant them towards a particular flavor or a particular kind of vibe.
Now that you're saying it, it makes total sense. In playing it, in playing it, not so much. Did not see that at all while we were in the throes of the back and forth and the daggers. As I said, though, now that you say it, I'm like, oh, I can point to very specific rooms and interactions we had where I'm like, oh yeah, that was clearly, oh yeah, there's talking horses. Oh, and then over here was, yeah. So that cool. I think in hindsight, would that have been helpful and actionable? I think a little bit, had I caught on to that in the moment. Listeners, you're going to hear me do, I think, a fair amount of that this episode. Before we recorded, I asked you, hey, can you send me the notes? And I got like 2 pages into your write-up. Yeah. And you also said there's like a whole multi-pages of addendums and adjustments.
Oh yeah, there's notes on notes on notes on notes on notes.
Well,
by hand.
Every adventure is the first draft, right? The first time your players play, it's the first draft. So I actually read like 2 pages and then was like, nope, we're going to do it live. And because I realized some of the questions I had hopefully will be more interesting on air.
Sure.
Case in point, I didn't realize each of those zones, and now until in hindsight was, no, the basement definitely felt spooky and gross and weird, and then the upper floor was a lot more kind of celestial, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the factions, and a while back we had an episode recently where we talked about factions. I think that's probably the one spot I have the most questions now, is after having gone through it and wrapped the campaign, I still am scratching my head about the factions that are in the castle.
Sure.
So I am curious to a degree to hear you talk about how, so with those 3 zones in mind of the entrance garden, the lower floors of the dungeon, and the upper floors, is that the 3? Because then you also talked about the middle, which would be a 4th.
No, so there's kind of like the ground floor, the upper floors, and the dungeon. Those are the 3.
Okay. So the factions, were they essential to our experience of the keep? Was it like, hey, understanding the factions will help you to understand the keep? Was that the intention? Or where did they fit into your design philosophy?
I think that's probably the thing that needs the most work, is tying the factions to the location. A couple of things. First of all, the main issue that I think I had in designing the factions for this is that the faction, I was designing this dungeon for 2 purposes. The first purpose was for an ongoing campaign where you guys had tons of history with the various factions, so I couldn't get that out of my head. The other component was that and also as an addendum to that previous point, that you guys were on like the last quest of the of the campaign, so this needed to be a campaign ending dungeon with some amount of possibility for satisfying conclusions to some of the various threads. The other thing I was trying to do was design something that, if I felt like it was good enough or interestingly, went interestingly and had enough stuff in it that was kind of cool, that I could just put out to the general Shadowdark community, Dolmenwood community writ large. And so I think I kind of got caught in the middle of those 2 things when it came to factions. Like, I was designing the factions for the purposes of being interesting to you guys, but also designing them to be kind of standalone in terms of this place. The problem with Horblight Keep in the fiction of Dolmenwood is that it is like kind of an isolated place, insofar as it is a very when you know the lore around it, which I'm not going to try and I'm not going to spoil any of the lore. I'm going to do my best at least to not spoil any Dolmenwood lore, because I think there's actually some interesting stuff in here in terms of dungeon design that I don't want anyone to feel like they can't listen to if they're going to play or in Dolmenwood. But the thing about Horrible Keep is that it is a fundamental pillar of the world. It is a very important place. And this is not a spoiler. It sits prominently on the player map. You're like, that place seems important. It has a name that makes it seems important, et cetera, et cetera. That was hard. So to speak a little bit more specifically about the factions are as follows, Jody. The first faction was the Droon. So these kind of mystical hedge wizardy kind of people who covet arcane things and live in the dark of the wood. And the Droon were there doing what they normally do, which is trying to pursue their own personal faction goals. The next faction was probably my favorite, which is the Goblin Cleaning Crew, who are these like indentured servants that basically just clean the dungeon constantly and can't leave and are just waiting for kind of the return of their master. Then there are the Cold-Blooded Redcaps, which you guys didn't really get to hang out with very much because they fireballed them. Then there were a couple of other factions that you guys definitely engaged with. There was my other favorite faction, which were the Frost Elf Phantoms, these kind of liminal spirits, who I wrote up as specifically having a task to give you, not unlike there are these ghosts in the Abbey of St. Cloud that have a similar function. Like you meet them, they give you a task. If you do the task, they give you some information or some benefit. Then the last two were individual monsters, one of them being a shape changer who was parading around like a Frost Elf noble, and then the other one was Rhymegnaw, this like turned crazed Frost Elf noble turned ghoul who had a backstory, but we ended up rushing through the last part of it, and so I didn't really divulge any of that. So those were my factions. My favorite factions, I know I'm going on a little bit here, but my favorite factions were the Goblin Cleaning Crew, who were responsible for kind of having these like teleportation closets and things so they could get around the keep, and then the Frost Elf Phantoms, because those kind of incentivized you to go different places and allowed you movement around the castle.
Yeah, we undeniably, those are the two factions we interacted with the most directly, I guess I would say. Full disclosure is my elf character I've been playing for a while died to one of the Frost Elf Phantoms, partially self-inflicted party wound and partially just bad luck. Then we needed me to have a new character kind of on the fly, and you were like, hey, play a goblin from this Goblin Cleaning Crew, and literally character both in game and in my head came running onto the scene and was able to enjoy the last 3 sessions playing a different kind of thief. When you only roll backstab bonuses on your talents, it really sets the narrative for what kind of character you're playing. And then enjoyed that. And also, when that character showed up, it gave us a really strong connection to the Goblin Cleaning Crew. Mm-hmm. Also, just by nature of, so he's this goblin who lives in the castle, would know where things are, and you were like, here's the map. Did you have a vehicle for us getting here's the map elsewhere in the dungeon that we would have at some point just got the map?
Not just got the map. There are a couple of locations where you can, certainly the dungeon is, there are a couple of locations where you could have accessed like a map-like substance or map-like thing. But no, this actually, I want to call this out early in the app because I think it's important. The one thing that hampers my ability to really analyze this dungeon is the fact that it took us a long time to get through in real time.
Yeah,
and like we were plagued by some scheduling problems. We were, the end of a campaign, you want everybody to be there as much as possible. So we were really trying to maximize player count at the table, which we, throughout the campaign, we'd been kind of like, yeah, we got, 3 or 4 people. Let's just play and see what happens. And this dungeon was also gnarly enough that you needed a fairly complementary cast of characters. So not having a priest or whatever for turn undead was a real costly situation in the session that you died in. And or maybe we did have a priest. I don't remember. I don't think we did. The long and short of it is that a lot of people have asked us to talk about player mapping, right? And I love player mapping, but it is very hard to force players to map. If they don't want to or they don't like it, it's hard to. Also, this dungeon, the map that I used, I didn't draw. I stole it from Dice and Logos, and I don't think I would do that again because it meant that I didn't know the map well, and it also created a situation where I was applying logic to a map the way that I saw it and not building it from the ground up, and therefore I think there were some places where it was just kind of confusing where the heck you guys were, and it was hard to visualize that there were like 4 stories, to going up and 3 stories going down. This is like a very vertical dungeon. And that verticality is great, but then you add in these closets that can teleport you kind of around the dungeon, and you start to get very discombobulated very quickly, especially when you have a month or 2, or really just a month between like multiple sessions. That ended up creating a situation where every time we came to the table, we were like revisiting the dungeon for the first time. And that was why I felt like, okay, having this goblin character who knows his way around, and I can kind of just give you a dungeon map that's unlabeled. And I told you a number of times, like, yeah, you wouldn't know where that is. You would never have been in there. You just kind of know what it is or know what it looks like. That felt right. Largely because you guys had explored a sizable amount of the dungeon at that point, but also it was going to help speed things along, and we were in scheduling hell at that point.
Yeah, and hats off to you. I don't know that I would have handled it as gracefully as you did, and you kind of like stuck to it to make sure we got through it, so to speak. That it was a rough scheduling go for our group. It just was. That was part of my spiral that we talked about in January, right? Or the IRL downtime episode was like, it was largely because I thought this campaign was going to fall apart right at the finish line, and this is something I'd worked really hard on, and I wanted to see this dungeon get played through with a level of fidelity, and I didn't think that was going to happen. Yeah, well, I feel as though it still did.
I do too.
I genuinely think that there is an argument to be made for both player mapping and for just handing people a map. And I think in this particular dungeon, it would always be best if you send this out to the public to create a vessel for going, here's a map.
Yeah.
Because you have an extra plane or something going on. So if I show you my notes, it's a pretty detailed map because I like mapping.
Yeah.
And then we get to the goblin hallway, which is the extra planar space, and my mapping stops entirely.
Right. Interesting.
That I just stopped mapping after that. And my elf character was still alive when we first got there. And I just stopped mapping because I was like, I have no way of knowing where we're at. There's no point in mapping anymore.
This is super interesting. I want to talk about this. So, okay, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. So the way that this worked was there were several closets. I think there were 5 closets in the dungeon, each of them in kind of different locations. These were the secret doors. There are no secret doors on the Dyson map. That's another thing I would change. Actually, there's one secret door. But otherwise, there were no secret doors, which I found very weird and dissatisfying. So I just kind of found these like illustrated closets and was like, okay, these closets are going to be teleportation closets. But these goblins need a place to live. They wouldn't be able to live with the nobles, certainly. They would be sequestered somewhere else. Let's put them in like a liminal, fairy liminal space. Great. Well, I have a couple questions. First, is there a way that, having played through the dungeon, that you thought that I could have handled that better? Because I'm not super satisfied with that answer. It was the easy thing. It made sense in the moment. And there were these kind of like fun, pithy little phrases above all the doors that would kind of give you a hint about where they went. And again, to give more context, you go through one of these closets, you end up in this hallway that's kind of an interdimensional space. There's other doors. They all take keys. The keys and the doors take you to other parts of the dungeon. What do you think I could have done better? Is there a better way? Is there a way that you thought that this would have been more successful? Because I'm interested in feedback on this and this kind of way of moving around the dungeon, almost fast traveling.
I think it was great. We got the kind of through happenstance. Well, no, through direct play, because again, this was before my elf died. He'd got the keys. He stole them off a goblin in a sticky fumbling, we'll say, and had seen a goblin use one, and so we had a sense of what they were. So that was a great way to telegraph, hey, this thing exists, and we made sense of what it was. So I think it worked fine. It also created a safe space and an interaction with the factions in that we were already kind of finding alliance with the goblins very quickly to go like, okay, this can be a safe interdimensional space, then we can use this as base for exploration, which is just prior to my elf's demise and then just playing a goblin straight up, which really sealed all that in. Yeah. At the point, one of the party members is part of the goblin cleaning crew and the resistance. That, we were attached to that faction and made it very easy. So I thought that was generally really successful. It did undercut the getting a sense of the whole place. I don't know if that's necessarily avoidable without going, here's the counteraction of there's a map to be had.
Yeah.
I think my one genuinely like, hey, I would look at this for the dungeon is, and it's tied into the discussion of this, how did this whole interdimensional space and interacting with the goblins work? As a player, it felt like almost everything was gated. And that may be, we should like
interesting
say this right off the top too. We did not take the main entrance. We took a side entrance that was trapped. And then I think I want to get to the HOTT down the line pretty quick here after this. Is we took a side entrance that had a really cool trap that I thought did a great job with of we interacted with it and multiple characters interacted with it differently, and we bypassed it and figured it out and then used it later to kill a critter, which was super cool. And
that was awesome.
Kind of kicked off the whole thing. In my mind, mostly as a thief player, I kept going like, okay, we've taken a side door. That means our perspective is tweaked. Like we're not getting the story as it lays out from front door in.
Right.
And there should be a sense of you're coming through a front door of a place and there is an evolution of a location. The things that live here come in and out of this entrance. There's an understandable evolution. This is everything, there's some 101 books of like basics of architecture that people reference all the time. And we just assume things in rooms and spaces of when you first enter a building, there is a foyer of some kind, even in homes. So we bypassed that. Okay, great. So things should start making sense. And we walked in a side room and then there was like some traps and some threats and we bypassed those. And then we got into the middle room or this liminal space. We ended up there. We had to like steal some keys to get in there. Okay, we got in there. And we had some like, okay, this seems to be a safe zone, but there's nothing actionable. It's to get to something else.
Right.
And as soon as we walked out, again, my singular player's perspective is when we started interacting with there's some moth critters that
the yickerwills.
The yickerwills that plague the building and they're a resident monster indigenous critter problem. A pest, if you will. And then we got nuked by a ghost. Well, interacting with the ghosts felt as though to the party that it was not an interact with the ghosts, that they were just a threat to be ignored.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, it's one of those unfortunate moments now where I go, the party latched onto one thing you said, and that changed everything we did from then on out.
Yeah.
And now in hindsight, I'm like, oh, and it was during play, I realized like, oh, we've misinterpreted this whole thing. But it was like, okay, if you're going to go downstairs, there's a barrier of frost and you're going to freeze to death. But to get to beyond that, you have to go through the freezing to death. And then the other side of that, and you got into the problem that a lot of old modules have, or I got into the problem of a mindset where it's, you start going, don't touch anything.
Right.
Everything's dangerous. There was a kind of famous, you've joked about, a sofa that had a really meaningful clue that was just a sofa. And our party avoided that thing like the plague until we literally got a chance to blow up the room it was in to kill it. It was just a sofa.
Okay, I want to talk about this.
So everything started feeling like a threat.
Right.
And the liminal space wasn't, but there weren't enough other tokens, I guess.
I want to talk about traps.
Mm-hmm.
So there are and I haven't counted them. There are very few traps in the dungeon. So one of the traps is a monster. There are these tapestries that are hanging from the wall in like this kind of like hall in the dungeon entrance that you guys came in, and they will peel off. There are what look to be like yelling adventurers in the threaded tapestries who are the adventurers that have been dragged in there over the years, who like tried to break in, and then these woven frost elf warriors peel themselves off,
extremely cool,
and try and drag you into the tapestry, and then you're trapped there forever. Okay, well, that's a trap, I guess. What's interesting to me is that somehow we got into what is sometimes referred to as the museum dungeon, where you can't touch anything, right? But all of the threats, like there weren't actually very many traps that if you touched things or engaged with them in a meaningful way would just nuke you.
When I say touch, I mean just generally interact,
right?
Not specifically.
And as written, the ghosts don't just attack you, right? Like they just kind of float towards you. In fact, the ghost that killed your character was literally like asking for food.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a kitchen that you guys were just in around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am legitimately interested in how I could have done better to telegraph that like the dungeon is weird. It is not like, it wasn't ever really meant to be, except in a few places, an obligatory danger.
So the reaction to the asking for food was hit it with a fireball.
Right. 100%.
And that was like, okay, that happened. You said just before that happened, this is just like this looks like the spirit you saw at the bottom of the lake.
Right.
Which was a fight. It showed up and we touched something of its, but it like immediately attacked us.
Right. You
attacked us.
Attempted to steal its sword.
Attacked us immediately and severely. Like,
right.
Oh, heck, this thing can kill you. And so our reaction was like, oh, shoot, this thing is super dangerous. Kill it, kill it, kill it. Was at least, I'm assuming, why the other players reacted the way they did. Is the thing it was compared to, we had very recently had a near party death experience. So it's the same. So it must be the same threat. And then, a little bit of, I think, either bravado or miscalculation on the player's hand.
Yeah.
And it was okay. And then from that point on, it felt for a while like just ignore the specters and they won't attack you. You can just stay away from them. But that was I think the first one we'd really started to interact with, and it was like, oh, it's going to attack. It's coming towards us. It's going to attack. Mm. And there's others in the room. Okay, blow up the room. And it was a reasonable assumption that came on the back of the side room and what I think of as a traditional trap. There was a pressure plate, and it torched the room. And then the next room was the tapestry guys that I would call a hazard, but whatever.
Yeah, sure. I would agree.
And then we went into another couple rooms, and then it was just by going downstairs we started taking damage just by walking into that room.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went upstairs, and then we'd been told about this thing that lives down in the basement that just rips everybody apart.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, that's a threat. Okay, well, we'll back away from that and we'll go to this thing. Oh, well, that's a threat. We'll back away from that and we'll go to this thing. And it was level appropriate. I had the unfortunate reality of having a low-level comparative character with an unusually low number of hit points for his level.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, I knew that going in. I was like, this is way out my pay grade.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the loop started, and why I started my discussion of this going, but we came in a side door, so we were confronted by threats. And so to get to the pieces that told the story, it started feeling like it was like behind really nasty threats after nasty threats after nasty threats.
Interesting.
Until we hit a break point where it was like, oh, and we started getting some information to start getting a sense of the place. I think it just was the first like 2 or 3 sessions before we really had a sense of that place. Yeah. I'll be honest, I had a massive realization on the way over to record today about the whole place. That is kind of a world spoiler thing, so I'll tell you off mic.
Okay.
But I was like, oh my gosh, I just realized I had an assumption till today that was wildly inaccurate about. And it has to do with the overall purpose of the keep. And you came up with something, I think, that was really, really cool for what the keep is and what you hid in the basement. And like the writing you did around it that was very creative, and the gardens tie into that. And we didn't see the gardens, so maybe that would have made sense if we went through the gardens. And again, that sequencing. But that was really my only thing is the threats were nasty, as they should be, high level dungeon. And then it felt for a while like to get access to information, it was deal with potentially player killing threat.
So this is something that I think I need to work on. So there's a lot of these like lists of like OSR challenges. I want to get into the like how hot was the dungeon. So like agreed that like I probably leaned too heavily on hazards. There were some cool traps. I never like to put a trap in a dungeon that I'm making unless it actually is cool and interesting and can be useful. And I have a very difficult time thinking up interesting traps. They just don't come to me very naturally. So
it's a very unnatural thing to do.
Yeah.
Like it's a weird thing. Like they stand out in history because there's not a lot of examples of them.
Right. And I'll be honest, like making a good trap is just like a time intensive thing that sometimes, doesn't really feel like it's worth the time and energy, but inevitably almost always is. But what I leaned too heavily on, I think was hazards. So let me talk about an obstacle though. So an obstacle was this room that you're referencing where you went in it and you started taking what basically con damage. 2 things about that. First of all, one of the big problems that you guys had early in the dungeon is that you couldn't go to some of the lower levels because you explicitly needed cold weather apparel, which 2 of your characters in your party left on the boat and were like, surely we won't need this. And so that was actually, it wasn't frustrating to me, but like there were a number of times where I felt like to run this with fidelity, I'm like, I wrote this up that if you don't have cold weather gear, you're just going to get shellacked. And then there's this room that has an important item, which I do want to actually talk about a little bit, that ends up being a fake item and,
a trick, one might say.
A trick, and that's why I want to talk about it. The long and short of it is that one of the things I felt like happened was there was a confluence of player decisions that made the dungeon more difficult in ways that were unfun, which basically said, no, you can't go in here. But that I felt like were reasonable hazards that were not monsters, right? Like it's reasonable in a keep that is associated with literally the Prince of the Cold.
I agree with what you just said 100%.
So, but one of the things that happens to a lot of GMs is you get in the middle of a dungeon and you realize that the dungeon is less fun because the players have made decisions oftentimes because of like real life. Just, one of them somebody was getting snacks and didn't say, hey, maybe we should bring the cold weather gear. And somebody's like, yeah, we need slots, so we'll just leave it on the boat. And certain GMs would say that's their problem. The players get punished for their decisions. To me, there was a situation where I was like, man, this is a bummer because it essentially means that you have to go find other ways to deal with this. But I don't know that I don't know. I did provide other ways to deal with it. This is something I've been going through in my head. So I'm really glad you brought it up. Is the appropriate balance of hazards, obstacles, tracks and trips, of tricks and traps. Excuse me. So that they are diversified, they're interesting, but they also don't create a museum dungeon where everything is bad. And I think a lot of people think about that as only traps. Like, don't touch anything because you're just going to set up a bunch of traps. But I actually think that you can do that just by the vibe of the dungeon being everything's going to kill you. And even if it's a diversified set of challenges, the challenges are just piling up one on another. And so I wanted to ask you, were there places where you felt like I threaded the needle well? And then, how could I have improved the kind of balance of the kind of hazards, obstacles, tricks, and traps in a way that was more satisfying potentially?
As always, there is the challenge of the GM to set up hazards, obstacles, tricks, and traps for your players, and also honor their solutions, right? If they have creative answers to their problems, find a hey, yeah, that'll work. Yes, let's roll with that.
Sure.
Which at times can be fraught in and of itself because sometimes there's knock-ons. So I think a moment when it felt like, hey, we came up with a creative solution and we're rewarded for that was frankly the whole scene with the shape changer. That floor, it wasn't until we hit that floor that, frankly, I had any idea what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was she felt gated behind information because reasons like shape changer and...
Yeah, she has a lot of lore reasons for being
right,
there.
and she has layers and there's a triple stack of just her story.
Yeah.
Which was interesting and really enjoyed that. But learning that, we killed her because I'm in hindsight, man, we really murder hoboed our way through this dungeon.
I'll interject here and saying I think that was because of the time, the time differential. It's harder to keep all of the micro story elements and anyways, I don't know.
No, I absolutely think that's true. We walked into a threat. We walked into a trap, met a hazard that was... I don't remember if the hazard was avoidable because my character was in a side room when the tapestry guys attacked.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if they're avoidable. I think being in that room, they're the guardians of that room.
Yeah, they are avoidable. You have to. You just can't linger in front of it and investigate. As long as you kind of move through there and recognize the hazard, nothing will happen.
Do the noble I'm posh and I live here thing. Yeah. So I think it was because we walked in through the way we did and made the decisions we did, and then had a staggered meetings of play. We just kept seeing one threat after another.
Yeah.
And then we nuked this shape changer lady, but then there were clues that were hidden around the room that we now had a safe. We cleared the room and started getting information and started being able to act on that information. And we had my goblin had shown up at that point. So we had a map of the place and we had a sense of it. The information, it just took a while to get some of that lore.
Interesting.
And I think all that lore felt great and felt really earned and was challenging, but was accessible in an interesting way. We very much approached it. I say we murder hoboed our way in, which we kind of did, but also the way we got to the killing of the thing was very our usual, very roundabout circle the drain, quite literally in this instance. Also, there was clearly something amiss about that location that you kept, you were very overt about explaining to us. So I think that section of the dungeon played out in a kind of ideal way. Because and then from there, we did kind of launch off into the thing and started making informed decisions and interacting with the place. So really, my feedback of the dungeon is there just needs to be more information sooner.
Okay.
And where would that have been?
I have a follow-up for you.
Yeah.
Because I think this is really interesting. Because this is something that you and I have dealt with so many times of Players will get in a dungeon. They'll meet the first right or left. It's a T intersection. Do we go right or left? They have no information other than an idea of what's inside the dungeon, broadly speaking.
And they talk for half an hour.
And they talk for half an hour. How long... And I know that, like, I'm asking for specifics, but I want you to give me kind of a broad or you know, kind of nuanced answer here. How long should it take to understand, to be able to make informed choices in a dungeon? Are we talking about first room you get something that you can start being actionable? Because I think there are some people who are like, no, you can, you know, you can stumble your way through many, many rooms and still not know what's going on, and that's fine. I think for a thematic dungeon like this, it's important to have lore and actionable, and better if it's both. I don't know. What are your thoughts on when would it have felt good to no longer be bumbling around in the dark? Because I felt like you guys got information. It just wasn't information that you needed at the moment. It was like the wrong information at the wrong moment.
I think I'm going to put a number on this, which is dubious, and anybody listening... you know that I'm randomly grabbing a number.
No, Jody wants to hear from you directly.
3.
3
is the number.
Okay.
By the third room of the dungeon, the players should have something that they can use as a compass.
Interesting. What do you mean by a compass?
I mean something that points them towards a goal, an objective, a really substantial clue that they can act on, a set of footprints down the hallway, a map, something that gets them, we're going to follow this. And yeah, maybe later they find something that goes, hey, you grabbed onto this thing and you could have gone left and it would have saved you 2 hours of dungeon exploration. Not intentionally building that. That's garbage. But like, oh, we misinterpreted this thing and but I think within those first 3 rooms, they need something that is, here's where you go. Here's
a place to go.
For more information. The old Russian doll of like, okay, you are in the thing, 3 rooms in, we've got to open a doll and see another doll, and so on.
Okay.
We talked about in our last episode, I had just run the Oldenhaller contract.
Yeah.
And a thing I added was and the reason I got to 3 was literally in the third room. There'd been little micro clues kind of in the first 2 rooms. Mm-hmm. In the third room, they got the very, very generic and like very weirdly overview map of the place.
Right.
That basically would be the equivalent in the keep of going basement, ground floor, first floor, second floor. Yeah. And like it just would have explained what those floors are, not what's on them, not a layout, but just like, interesting. Oh, that's where this stuff is. So it's easy to do this in hindsight. And like, I'm not dunking because we had a great time. Like,
no, but this is what this episode is for, Jody. I want to tear this thing apart because I also had a good time running it, but I think it could be better and interesting.
I think there is a 10 out of 10 adventure here. Like, really, I'm not being funny and just like, hey, way to go, man.
I appreciate that.
No, I do. And that's part of my like feeling passionate about it too, is like the really cool stuff you didn't get enough time on stage. So when we interacted with our first goblin in our first magic closet,
yes,
there could have been here's a map on the inside of the closet for the goblins, the generic, like wash your hands before returning to work. And here's a very janky version of,
okay, so
that could have been there. The ledger room with the flames.
Yes.
That
room,
don't know what those flames... Oh, I do know what those flames do. Okay, that was another real-time realization. Yeah. Now I know what those flames do. So, very cool room, very interesting.
Underutilized.
I have no idea how to use it or what it's for.
Okay.
The book could have been...
Can I talk to you about that room in just a sec?
Because let me finish this thought, and then
yes.
I am flirting around something, and if there are certain listeners that I think hear me saying it, so I'm just going to say it.
Yeah,
I am talking about quantum ogres.
Yeah,
that I would love to see adventure writers start putting quantum information. Mm-hmm. Here's a list of clues you can drop whenever.
Yeah,
and I, in hindsight, feel like Horblight Keep is a great example of like, man, here's a half a dozen little nuggets look for excuses to tell your players this stuff.
Interesting.
And that would have been it. So talk to me about this is an interesting, let's go back to the HOTT thing.
Yeah.
Hazard, obstacle, trick, trap. There's a room with a ledger and some interesting flames.
So there's two important details about this room. Otherwise it's just kind of a generic room. The first important detail is that there are these 3 plinths with flames on them that if you drop things into, they kind of disappear. And then there's a ledger, and the ledger records the names of every single person who has come into the keep, which I thought would be interesting. But anytime you put that in an adventure, then you require that like the person running the adventure knows all those things, which is a totally bananas thing to do and not a good idea. So in reality, I think I would scrub this entire room. What it was essentially a room that was meant to record all the treasure and all the things that had been given to the Cold Prince in terms of tithes, essentially. And what you guys didn't necessarily know was that if you gave enough tithes, you could leave with the benefits that you got up at the top of the keep.
Oh.
So
yeah, definitely we didn't piece that together.
So there are a couple of things. This is the other thing about dungeons that I think is interesting. There are a few things about the dungeon that I was never going to give you any clues about, and the only way that you could have figured it out is to kind of ass backwards, stumble your way into it.
And I think that's a great example of when to do that, because we hit half of that puzzle and figured it out in a very cool way.
Yes.
Again, like you're saying yes to a character pulling a weird, like literally I remember sitting at the table and Raywin, our world's most powerful sorceress that we've talked about before, the player just not randomly, she knew what she was doing, goes like, oh, I say drop this name and say the following, and like watched you do the like, I can't say no.
Yeah, I thought I was trying to find ways to say no in that moment because I was furious that a player had outsmarted me.
And it was like, we're going to say yes. So yeah, that was say yes to the cool thing. And I love that we never got the rest of that puzzle or pieced it together. And I think because it wasn't essential to understanding Horblight Keep that we understood that loop.
Right. So, okay. So the room, I think, could be repurposed. By the way, if you put treasure in there, it goes directly into the treasure vault, which is basically right underneath it in the map. So
could that simply be repurposed to talk about the theater in the basement? Because that was the realization I had on the way in today.
Yes.
I'm just going to do it because I said I wasn't. Now I am.
Yeah.
Is the keep is actually a theater.
The keep's a theater.
Yeah. And like that legitimately didn't fully sink in until I was on my way in today.
So we're late in the episode. I don't think this is any spoilery stuff, but so I'm just going to kind of lay it out. The entire dungeon is basically is inspired by me rereading parts of I want to say Midwinter Night's Dram, which is a great whiskey. But,
go with it. That's what we're calling it.
A Midsummer Night's Dream.
I don't know.
And so there's a lot of Shakespearean elements. And essentially, again, no spoilers here, but the Cold Prince has written a play that is a very bad sort of saccharine, like a very high school, like a angsty play about his lost love. And in order to get into the massive treasure vault, you have to do a few very specific things. You have to read the secret soliloquy that is written in his original written script, which is in the map/library room, kind of secretly hidden. You have to get his real heart, which is this black, it's called the Heart of Winter, and you must hold it aloft like in Hamlet with the skull, and you must read the soliloquy in front of the treasure vault doors. That is a very hard puzzle, and it was a puzzle that I didn't necessarily think that anyone was going to necessarily solve, but it's pretty, I think it's not obvious, but you can figure it out from the clues around, and I think, inevitably, like, I would kind of rework how it was telegraphed in the future so that it was more clear. You guys eventually figured it out. It took you a little bit of time, and I would have liked for you to figure it out a little bit easier and gone through a little bit less frustration. But the long and short of it is that the keep, especially the dungeon, was both literally and figuratively a stage in which the entire thing was a metaphor for for like the Cold Prince and his sort of struggles, and like basically it was a very high-minded thing that I never really thought anyone would figure out. But yeah, it was essentially the entire thing was a stage. Saying it now, you know, when you're writing something, you're inevitably trying to finish it, right? And what's interesting is that I didn't really change the dungeon in between sessions. Like, I made notes that I wanted to change in the future, but unless there was something that was truly broken or unfinished, I just didn't change it. I was like, no, I'm going to run it the way that I wrote it, which I almost never do. Even with like modules, I will make changes in between where I'm like, this literally does not make sense. It needs to be more clear, or this is written poorly, or I don't really like this. And I'll make some changes to modules. This one I really didn't, because I wanted to see my failures and stuff like that. And of course, during prepping for the next session, you're like, okay, I probably need to telegraph this, and that. That's very interesting. This room with the flames was an example of me sort of succumbing to the problems of just using somebody else's map and thinking about kind of the first thing that came in my head. And so you saying that of like, make it about like, that's the room to deliver the information. Totally. Yeah, that makes total sense.
So now in hindsight, after you just explained all that, I want to give like, what was the perception I spent literally every session walking around with?
Yeah.
Was that this was the, like, that we were either looking for the Cold Prince himself or his girlfriend. It's not, but it is.
Yeah.
That like, I thought that's what we were looking for, because I hadn't internalized. And if the other players, because I know at least a few other players listen, and if they're right now going like, dude, you didn't see that, I genuinely want one of you to text me and be like, yes, I understood that the whole time. But I walked around going, no, this is this dude's like summer home. And the Shakespearean stuff you did just was sliding off of my head. I was like, oh, neat. Oh, quirky. Oh, weird face stuff. And I didn't internalize it literally until today, that I was like, oh, the whole thing makes sense now.
Yeah.
And so I guess my argument would be like, why hide that at all? Like, why not have them walk in? How would the experience be damaged to walk in knowing from jump, this is his theater home, right? Like, is this dungeon weakened if they know that? And this is Jody regurgitating advice that Matt has given Jody,
I know,
over the years of like, why are you being stingy with the clues? And that it's, that this is the first time I've ever been on the other side being like, it just felt like it was really having to work to get at those story beats of what is this place. And again, players going to be players and do everything they can to slalom through the clues. So, I think we're probably at a good spot. We can take a quick break, hear from a sponsor, gather our thoughts, and wrap up with some final hotness.
This episode of Dungeon Master... Oh, my God. Jody, we have today. It's been warm here. And you know what? Our sponsor today is none other than White Claw. That's right, WIGHT Claw. Non-copyright infringing White Claw is the beverage that you should have your hands around this summer. Jody, I see you over there during our you've got a stack of White Claws. Talk to me about, why do you love White Claw?
Dude, it's the taste that wakes the dead. I am here for it. I got my energy up. I got jacked up. I got racked up. We got gold coins. We're off to the party. We're back. We're partying here. We're partying after the party. They have 6 delicious flavors, and I'm here for all of them. Every single one is a banger that would wake the dead. That's my call. I got to go.
Oh my God, he's out of here. He's leaving. He's opening up the refrigerator, getting another White Claw. What can I do? I mean, if you haven't cracked open a White Claw recently, do yourself a favor and do so. They've also got non-NA versions now, which are which are White Claws without all the fun. But if you're one of those people who likes to imbibe that ghostly goodness, grab yourself a White Claw, Jody. What do you always tell me? You always tell me something about these White Claws, and it just tickles me inside.
Don't sip it, grip it, and rip it. All right, I'm back. Let's bring this topic into the light with some core takeaways from this discussion.
All right, Jody, my first one is that playtesting is fun, and I think more of us should, when we write a dungeon, we should run it as if we're playtesting it, and with the spirit of playtesting of this is a thing that I have created, and it's not going to be perfect. And I think it's super fun to try and design a large dungeon and then see it work and then see it not work in some places. I do think that in the future, if I was doing this, I would make changes along the way and not try and just really kind of grind through some of the parts where I was feeling frustrated. But ultimately, it was a cool experience, and I think that it's fun to treat any experience GMing like you're testing something out, because that's kind of what we're doing all the time.
That good old testing to see what works and what doesn't. Taking us to that acronym HOTT, hazard, obstacles, tricks, and traps. I'm just going to caution folks of it is a wonderful mantra in terms of assessing diversity of your dungeon and giving players different kinds of problems to solve and different bits of this and that. But like all things, moderation is key. That if everything is hot, then they won't want to touch it.
Oh, man, that was actually quite good. The last takeaway I have is that you want to write for a specific audience. If you're writing an adventure to be published for other GMs, write to that audience. And that's very hard to do. But what I got caught up doing, and I said this early in the show, is that I was kind of writing for two audiences. I was writing for my table and also writing for this theoretical audience of people who might read this in the future. And that was to the detriment of the dungeon, I think, because if I would have been writing for you guys as my players, I would have designed a dungeon with more assumptions about your play style, but also I would have designed a dungeon that would have probably gotten us to a place where the information flowed a little faster.
I think that's great advice, and it's something we see in modern modules anyway, of you read somebody's module and you go like, oh, this is for not my group. This is for some other group. So even still, once you pick one audience, it ain't going to be for everybody anyway. Lastly, I'm going to say the quiet thing or the obvious thing out loud here to close us out. Just give people information. This is in for a feedback point Matt gave me long ago that I have really pulled close to my heart. I fight it, and my game is better for it. It's almost impossible to give your players too much information. As the torchlight grows dim and this place finally starts warming up, we hope you're able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can reach out to us via YouTube or Facebook, but best of all, as always, get us at the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. It's poppin'! You can find links to those feeds or any other materials we reference in this episode's show notes. Until next time, keep warm, friends.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by me, Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.
I want to play Deadlands now, man.
I know, I'm kind of doing these characters on the way out, you know?
I'm here for it.
Yeah. Sometimes you eat the bar, and sometimes the bar eats you.